After 10 years of war, the Greek armies had finally broken the city that had resisted them for a generation. Kings who had crossed the Aegean as young men began the journey back to their homes. Ships raised their sails. Warriors carried their spoils aboard. Families waited on distant islands and coastlines for men they had not seen in years. For Odysseus, king of Ithaca, home lay across the sea. It should have been the end of his story. Instead, it became the beginning of another. The voyage that followed would take 10 more years. Odysseus would sail into lands where the ordinary rules of the world seemed to disappear. He would enter the cave of a giant who ate men alive. He would anger Poseidon, one of the most powerful gods in the Greek world. His crew would open a forbidden bag of winds when Ithaca was already visible on the horizon. Cannibal giants would destroy almost his entire fleet. A goddess would transform his companions into animals. Odysseus would travel to the edge of the world and speak with the dead. He would hear the song of the sirens while tied to the mast of his own ship. He would be forced between Scylla, a monster that took sailors from the deck, and Charybdis, a whirlpool capable of swallowing the sea around it. And, one by one, every man who had left Troy with him would disappear. All the while, across the water in Ithaca, another disaster was growing. Odysseus had been gone so long that many assumed he was dead. Powerful men moved into his home. They consumed his food, slaughtered his livestock, pressured his wife Penelope to choose a new husband, and treated his young son Telemachus as an obstacle standing between them and a kingdom. The Odyssey is usually remembered as an adventure filled with gods and monsters, but beneath all of it is a much simpler idea. A man is trying to return home. The question is, how much of himself will still be left when he gets there? This is the story of Odysseus, his lost crew, the gods who helped him, the god who hunted him across the sea, and the long road from Troy back to Ithaca. Odysseus's life to Aegean, with Odysseus sailing away from Troy. It begins much later. By the time the poem opens, the famous voyage has already gone terribly wrong. Odysseus has lost his ships. His companions are dead. He is stranded far from home on the island of the goddess Calypso. Meanwhile, the people of Ithaca have heard almost nothing about him for years. That choice matters, because the Odyssey is not told as a simple straight line from one adventure to the next. Homer begins near the end of the journey, then gradually reveals the disasters that came before it. Odysseus himself will eventually become the narrator of the most famous part of his story. To the people who have given him shelter, he recounts the Cyclops, Circe, the underworld, the sirens, and the destruction of his crew. Before we reach those stories, however, the poem takes us somewhere Odysseus has not seen in nearly 20 years. Ithaca. Odysseus had been king there before. The Greek expedition sailed for Troy. His household included his wife Penelope and their son Telemachus, who had been only an infant when his father left for war. 10 years passed at Troy. Then more years passed with no king returning over the horizon. To the people living in the palace, Odysseus was becoming less like a missing man and more like a memory. And that uncertainty created an opportunity. Suitors from Ithaca and the surrounding islands began gathering around Penelope. They were not simply men hoping to marry a widow. Marriage to Penelope was tied to power, inheritance, and the future of Odysseus's household. Day after day, they occupied the palace, feasted on food that was not theirs, drank Odysseus's wine, and competed for the position he had left behind. Telemachus was old enough to understand what was happening, but not yet powerful enough to stop it. This is where Athena enters the story. Among the Olympian gods, Athena is the figure most consistently aligned with Odysseus. She values the qualities that define him: intelligence, planning, endurance, and the ability to survive through thought rather than strength.
At the opening of the Odyssey, the gods discuss Odysseus's fate while Poseidon is away. Athena argues that the time has come for him to be allowed home. Poseidon's absence is important. Odysseus is not wandering because the sea is simply dangerous. He has made an enemy of the god who controls it. The reason lies in one of the journey's most famous episodes, an encounter that has already happened by the time the poem begins. On a distant island, Odysseus and his men entered the cave of a cyclops named Polyphemus. They escaped. But Odysseus did not leave quietly, and Polyphemus was the son of Poseidon. That mistake would follow him across the Mediterranean world. For now, though, Athena does not begin by rescuing Odysseus. She goes to Ithaca. Disguised as a visitor, she approaches Telemachus and begins pushing him toward action. If his father is alive, Telemachus must search for news of him. If Odysseus is dead, then his son must eventually accept that reality, bury him in memory, and become capable of defending his own house. It is an important part of the Odyssey that can disappear in shortened retellings. The poem is not only the story of a father returning, it is also the story of a son who has grown up in the space his father left behind. Telemachus calls an assembly. He confronts the suitors. He prepares to leave Ithaca and seek information from men who returned from Troy. The suitors do not take him seriously enough. That will change. While Telemachus begins his search, the man he is searching for sits on the shore of an island and looks toward a home he cannot reach. Odysseus is alive. But being alive is not the same as being free. Interlude. The rules of this world. Before the voyage begins in full, there is one idea that helps explain almost every encounter that follows: hospitality. In the Greek world of the Odyssey, a stranger arriving at a house or settlement is not simply an inconvenience. There are expectations about how that stranger should be treated. Food, shelter, conversation, and gifts can all form part of the relationship between host and guest. The stranger also has responsibilities. He is expected to behave with respect and not abuse the protection he has been given. The poem repeatedly tests these rules. The suitors in Ithaca are violating them from the inside. They entered another man's household and never left. They consume his animals, his wine and his wealth while pressuring his wife and threatening his son. Their behavior is not just rude. It represents a breakdown in the order that is supposed to hold a household together. Later, Odysseus will meet people who sit on the opposite side of that spectrum. The Phaeacians will feed him before demanding his entire story. Eumaeus will offer food to a beggar, even though he has little compared with the palace. Nausicaa will help a naked stranger who has appeared beside the river. And then there is Polyphemus. The Cyclops will turn the relationship between guest and host into something horrifying by treating the guests themselves as food. These contrasts make the Odyssey easier to follow, because the monsters are not random obstacles placed in the path of a hero. Many episodes ask a similar question in a different form. What happens when a stranger enters your world? Do you feed him? Do you fear him? Do you exploit him? Do you kill him? Or do you help him continue home? Odysseus is also tested by the same rules. He is capable of generosity and respect, but he is not always a perfect guest. The raid on the Cyclones after Troy is one of the clearest reminders that he and his men can become the threat in someone else's story.
The gods care about these relationships as well. Zeus is often connected with the protection of strangers and suppliants. Athena repeatedly helps Odysseus and Telemachus navigate a world where identity can be hidden and appearances can mislead. Poseidon, on the other hand, becomes the divine force that turns the sea itself into resistance. There is another rule that matters just as much. Names have power. Odysseus's name carries fame from Troy. It can earn respect in a royal court. But there are moments when survival requires him to hide it. The hero who is famous for his identity will repeatedly survive by pretending to be someone else. He becomes nobody in the Cyclops' cave. He becomes an invented Cretan traveler when he returns to Ithaca. He lets friends, servants, and even his wife look directly at him without knowing who he is. So the Odyssey constantly moves between two desires: the desire to be known and the need to remain hidden. That conflict will become one of the most important reasons his voyage lasts as long as it does. The island is Ogygia, home of the nymph Calypso. Odysseus has been there for years. Calypso wants him to remain with her. In Homer's story, she offers a life far beyond what any ordinary human can expect, including the possibility that he could escape mortality itself. Yet the extraordinary promise does not remove the central fact of his captivity. Odysseus wants Ithaca. He wants Penelope. He wants the difficult, mortal life that belongs to him. So while Calypso's island is beautiful, Homer repeatedly returns to the image of Odysseus at the shore, grieving and looking out across the sea. The first great temptation of the Odyssey is therefore not a monster. It is the possibility of never going home, because somewhere else has become comfortable enough to stay. The gods finally intervene. Hermes is sent to Calypso with the order that Odysseus must be released. She objects, but obeys. Odysseus builds a raft and prepares to cross open water once again. And the moment Poseidon sees him, the sea changes. The god has not forgotten Polyphemus. A storm tears into Odysseus's makeshift vessel. Waves destroy what he has built. After everything he has survived, the king of Ithaca is reduced to a single exhausted man, fighting not for glory, not for victory, but simply to reach land alive. He eventually reaches the country of the Phaeacians. There, for the first time in a very long while, Odysseus finds people willing to treat a stranger as a guest rather than prey. And once he is safe among them, they ask the question that finally opens the door to the journey we remember. Who are you? Odysseus answers by telling them what happened after Troy. And his story begins with a victory that immediately starts to go wrong. The gods of the Odyssey can make the story look as though human choices do not matter. Athena can disguise people. Poseidon can raise a storm. Hermes can deliver divine instructions. Zeus can destroy a ship with lightning. If divine beings have that much power, it is reasonable to ask whether Odysseus is actually controlling anything. The poem's answer is complicated. Fate places limits around the story. Odysseus is destined to return home, but that does not mean the route is protected. A prophecy can say that he will reach Ithaca. It can still leave open how long that takes, who survives beside him, and what condition he is in when he arrives. The gods shape circumstances. Humans still make decisions inside those circumstances. Poseidon does not force Odysseus to shout his real name to Polyphemus. Aeolus does not force the crew to open the bag. Helios does not force them to kill the cattle. Athena can help Telemachus grow into action, but she does not live his life for him. This gives the Odyssey a constant tension between divine power and human responsibility. When something terrible happens, there may be a god behind the storm. There may also be a human choice behind the reason the god is angry. The same is true of help.
Athena repeatedly creates opportunities for Odysseus, but he still has to recognize them and act correctly. Leucothea gives him the veil that can help him survive Poseidon's storm, but he still has to leave the wreckage and swim. Hermes gives him Moly before he meets Circe, but Odysseus still has to enter the house, face her, and force an oath. Even Calypso's release works this way. The gods order that Odysseus be allowed to leave. They do not send a perfect ship to carry him directly to Ithaca. He cuts the wood. He builds the raft. He sails. He survives the storm. The divine world, therefore, does not remove agency. It makes agency more dangerous. Mortals are operating inside a universe where larger powers have interests of their own. Athena likes Odysseus because his intelligence reflects qualities she values. Poseidon hates what happened to his son. Calypso wants Odysseus to remain. Helios demands justice for his cattle. Zeus balances competing claims while preserving the larger shape of fate. For a modern audience, it is useful not to flatten this into a simple battle between good gods and bad gods. Athena is an ally. Poseidon is an enemy. Both belong to the same divine order. Odysseus survives by learning how to move through that order without ever fully controlling it.
When Odysseus finally begins telling the Phaeacians who he is, he does not begin with the Cyclops. He begins with Troy behind him and 12 ships under his command. The war is over. His men are alive. Ithaca is still a destination rather than a memory. But almost immediately, the habits of war begin to work against the journey home. The first stop is Ismarus, a city of the Cicons. Odysseus and his men attack the settlement, kill many of its defenders, divide the spoils, and take captives. Odysseus wants to leave quickly. His men refuse. They remain on the shore, feasting and drinking. That delay is costly. The surviving Cicons call for reinforcements from inland. A larger force arrives and attacks the Greeks near their ships. The fighting lasts through the day. By sunset, Odysseus and the survivors are forced back to sea. According to his own account, 6 men from every ship have been lost. It is the first warning of the voyage. Odysseus can make good decisions and still fail to control the people around him. His men are not passive passengers waiting to be rescued. Again and again, they will act for themselves. Sometimes their choices will save lives. Sometimes they will destroy their own chance to return home. The fleet sails on, but weather drives it away from the route. Winds push the ships off course. For days they struggle against the sea before reaching another shore. There, the danger is completely different. There is no army. There is no monster. There is only food. Chapter 4. The Lotus Eaters occupy only a small part of the poem, but the idea will return in different forms. Odysseus will encounter places where remaining would be easier than continuing. Comfort, pleasure, immortality, knowledge, and simple exhaustion will all compete with the idea of home. The voyage is not only a battle against things that want to kill him. It is also a battle against reasons to stop traveling. The ships leave the Lotus Eaters and move again into unfamiliar water. Eventually, they reach the country of the Cyclops. At first, the Lotus Eaters occupy only a small part of the poem, but the idea will return in different forms. Odysseus will encounter places where remaining would be easier than continuing. Comfort, pleasure, immortality, knowledge, and simple exhaustion will all compete with the idea of home. The voyage is not only a battle against things that want to kill him. It is also a battle against reasons to stop traveling. The ships leave the Lotus Eaters and move again into unfamiliar water. Eventually, they reach the country of the Cyclops. At first, the landscape does not look like a trap.
There are goats. There is pasture. There are caves in the hills. The men are carrying wine and provisions. Odysseus is curious about the people who live there and wants to learn whether they respect strangers and the gods. That curiosity brings him to a cave belonging to Polyphemus. And from this point forward, Poseidon becomes part of the journey. Where did the Odyssey happen? It is tempting to draw the entire voyage as a precise line across a modern map. For some parts of the story, geography is clear. Troy belongs to the world of the eastern Aegean. Ithaca is a real Greek island. Pylos and Sparta are recognizable places in the sections centered on Telemachus. But once Odysseus is blown away from the familiar route, certainty becomes much weaker. Later readers have tried to connect the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, Aeolus, Circe, the Sirens, Scylla, and other episodes with real locations around the Mediterranean. Some proposed identifications are old and culturally important. None of them turns the poem into a modern navigation log. That uncertainty is useful for understanding the atmosphere of the story. The sea in the Odyssey is both real and mythic. Sailors know winds, islands, harbors, currents, and coastlines. They also enter places where giants live, gods intervene directly, and the dead can be approached through ritual. The farther Odysseus moves from the social world of Greece, the less predictable the rules become. Then, when he finally reaches the Phaeacians and later Ithaca, the world becomes recognizable again. For our documentary, that means the map should help viewers understand the direction of the story without pretending that every monster can be pinned to a verified coordinate. We can show Troy. We can show Ithaca. We can show the central Mediterranean as the imaginative space through which later traditions often place the voyage. But when we move into the Cyclops' country or Circe's island, the visual language can become more mythic. That is not avoiding history. It reflects the text itself. The Odyssey is a homecoming story in which geography becomes stranger the farther the hero moves from home. Chapter 5. The Cave of Polyphemus. Odysseus does not take his entire crew into the Cyclops' country. He leaves most of the men behind and chooses 12 companions to go with him. Among the supplies he carries is an unusually strong wine given to him earlier by Maron, a priest of Apollo whom Odysseus had spared during the attack on the Cicones. The detail seems unimportant at first. It will become the key to getting out alive. The group finds a large cave. Its owner is absent. Inside are cheeses, pens filled with young animals, containers of milk, and the signs of a prosperous pastoral household. Odysseus' companions immediately suggest the safest plan. Take some food, drive away a few animals, and leave before the owner returns. Odysseus refuses. He wants to meet the inhabitant of the cave and see what gift a host might offer a stranger. This decision is one of the reasons Odysseus remains such a complicated hero. He is famous for intelligence, but intelligence does not prevent him from making reckless choices. Curiosity, confidence, and pride repeatedly pull him toward danger. The men wait. At evening, the owner returns with his flock. Polyphemus is not simply a large man. Homer presents him as something outside ordinary human society. He lives apart from others. He is enormously strong. And once his animals are inside the cave, he seals the entrance with a stone so massive that the Greeks cannot move it. Only then does Polyphemus notice the strangers. He asks who they are and why they have come. Odysseus appeals to the customs that are supposed to protect guests and strangers. In the Greek world of the poem, hospitality is not a small matter of politeness. A traveler arrives vulnerable. A host has obligations. Guests also have obligations. Zeus himself is associated with the protection of strangers. Polyphemus is unimpressed.
He says the Cyclops do not care about Zeus or the other gods. Then he reaches for 2 of Odysseus's men. There is no negotiation after that. The Greeks have entered the home of a creature who does not accept the rules that make ordinary human contact possible. and now they are trapped behind a stone none of them can move. Odysseus considers killing Polyphemus while the Cyclops sleeps. Then he realizes that doing so would trap them permanently. Without Polyphemus alive to move the stone, the cave becomes their tomb. So he needs a plan that does two things at once. The Cyclops must be made helpless, but he must remain alive long enough to open the cave. The next day, Polyphemus leaves with his flock after eating more prisoners. Before he returns, Odysseus finds a large piece of olive wood in the cave. The men sharpen it into a stake, harden the point in the fire, and hide it. When Polyphemus comes back that evening, Odysseus puts the second part of the plan into motion. He offers him wine. The drink is stronger than the Cyclops expects. Polyphemus likes it and asks for more. After several cups, he asks Odysseus his name. Odysseus answers with one of the most famous lies in Greek mythology. His name, he says, is Nobody. Polyphemus promises Nobody a guest. Gift he will eat him last. Then, the Cyclops collapses into drunken sleep. Odysseus and his men heat the sharpened stake in the fire. Together, they drive it into Polyphemus's single eye. The giant wakes screaming. His cries bring the other Cyclops from the surrounding country. They gather outside the sealed cave and ask who is attacking him. Polyphemus gives them the answer Odysseus designed for him to give. Nobody is killing him. Nobody is hurting him. The others assume there is no attacker they can help him against. They tell him that if his suffering comes from the gods, he should pray to Poseidon. Then they leave. The name trick has worked, but the cave is still closed. Polyphemus, now blind, moves the stone and sits at the entrance. He feels the backs of his animals as they pass, expecting the Greeks to try escaping among the flock. Odysseus has already thought of that. He ties his men beneath the largest rams, placing each man under an animal where the Cyclops' hands will not reach. Odysseus himself clings beneath the biggest ram. One by one, the animals move past their blinded master. Polyphemus feels their backs. The Greeks pass beneath him. They reach open ground. They run to the ship, drive some of the Cyclops' animals with them, and push away from shore. At this moment, the story could have ended as one of Odysseus' greatest victories. He entered an impossible prison, invented a false identity, used the enemy's own strength to escape, and saved the surviving men through patience rather than brute force. Then, he makes the mistake that changes the rest of the voyage. From the safety of the ship, Odysseus begins shouting back at Polyphemus. His men beg him to stop. The Cyclops tears a huge piece of rock from the land and throws it toward the voice. The impact nearly drives the ship back toward shore. Odysseus still does not stop. He wants the Cyclops to know who defeated him. So the man who survived by calling himself Nobody announces his real identity. Odysseus, son of Laerte, king of Ithaca. The information gives Polyphemus exactly what he needs. The Cyclops raises his hands and calls upon his father, Poseidon. He asks the god of the sea to make sure Odysseus never reaches home. And if fate requires that he does return, then let him return late, in misery, after losing all his companions, traveling on another man's ship, and finding trouble waiting in his own house. The prayer is frightening because the audience already knows how close it comes to the shape of the story. Odysseus escapes Polyphemus, but he leaves the island with something far more dangerous following him.
The anger of the sea. The Cyclops episode is the point where the journey becomes personal for a god. Before Polyphemus, Odysseus has already lost men. Storms have already pushed the fleet away from its route. The voyage is dangerous, but danger at sea does not necessarily mean that one divine enemy is hunting him. After Polyphemus, that changes. Poseidon is not an abstract god in Greek myth. He is connected with the sea, earthquakes, horses, and violent natural power. For a man whose only route home crosses water, making Poseidon an enemy is almost the worst possible outcome. The important detail is that Odysseus does not anger Poseidon by blinding a random creature. Polyphemus is Poseidon's son. And even then, the prayer against Odysseus only becomes possible after Odysseus gives the Cyclops the information he was missing. His name, his father, his home. This is why the episode is more than a clever escape story. Inside the cave, Odysseus is almost perfectly suited to the problem. Strength cannot move the entrance stone, so he does not rely on strength. Killing the enemy would trap them, so he does not kill him. The false name confuses the other Cyclops. The wine weakens Polyphemus. The sheep create a way through the guarded entrance. Every part of the escape depends on understanding the limits of the situation. Then once the danger is behind him, Odysseus stops behaving like the man who designed that plan. He wants recognition. Heroic culture places enormous value on reputation. A great action attached to no name produces no lasting fame. Odysseus wants Polyphemus to understand that the man who defeated him was not nobody. That desire makes emotional sense. It is also disastrous. The contrast becomes even sharper when we look at the name Nobody. For a short time, Odysseus survives by removing himself from the heroic system completely. He becomes anonymous. The man famous for cleverness becomes a word that prevents his enemy from describing what is happening. Then he gives the fame back to himself. The rest of the Odyssey never allows him to forget the cost. This is also one reason Poseidon should not be treated as a villain in exactly the modern sense. The poem is not built around a simple good god fighting an evil god. Athena supports Odysseus. Poseidon opposes him. Zeus allows a larger destiny to move forward. The gods have families, rivalries, interests, and spheres of power that intersect with human choices. Odysseus is not innocent of every consequence. He is clever enough to escape Polyphemus. He is proud enough to make sure the Cyclops knows who escaped. From this moment onward, the sea is not merely distance between Odysseus and Ithaca. It is the territory of an offended god.
Chapter 6. The Prize of a Name. The Cyclops episode is often remembered as proof of Odysseus's cleverness. It is also a story about the moment cleverness becomes pride. While he is trapped in the cave, Odysseus survives by hiding his identity. Once he is safe, he cannot resist restoring it. He wants credit. He wants Polyphemus to understand that the victory belongs to him. That need to be known gives Poseidon a target. From this point on, the voyage repeatedly turns the sea itself into an enemy. Winds refuse to cooperate. Islands that should be temporary stops become months or years of delay. A home that can sometimes be seen remains impossible to reach. Odysseus and his remaining ships continue westward until they reach the floating island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. For once they are welcomed. And for once, the journey seems as though it may finally end.
Antaeus receives Odysseus as a guest and listens to the story of Troy. For a month the Greeks remain on his island. When Odysseus finally asks to continue home, Aeolus gives him an extraordinary gift. He takes the winds that could drive the ship away from Ithaca and seals them inside a leather bag. Only the west wind is left free to carry the fleet in the direction it needs to go. For 9 days and 9 nights, the plan works. Odysseus stays awake at the steering oar, unwilling to hand control to anyone else. On the 10th day, Ithaca appears. They are close enough to see fires burning on the land. After years of war and weeks of disaster, home is finally visible. Then, Odysseus falls asleep. His crew begins to talk about the bag Aeolus gave him. They assume their leader has been secretly carrying treasure while they return from Troy with less than they expected. Suspicion turns into resentment. Resentment becomes action. They open the bag. The trapped winds explode into the sky. The ship that had almost reached Ithaca is driven back out to sea. The entire fleet is carried all the way to the island it has just left. Odysseus returns to Aeolus and asks for help again. This time the welcome is gone. To Aeolus, a man who has been blown back after receiving divine assistance must be hated by the gods. He refuses to help a second time and orders Odysseus away. The episode is cruel because there is no monster to defeat and no complicated prophecy to interpret. Home was visible. The men themselves destroyed the opportunity. The fleet leaves without the wind god's support. For 6 days they row. On the 7th, they enter a harbor surrounded by steep cliffs. It looks protected. It is almost perfectly calm. Odysseus, suspicious of the narrow entrance, keeps his own ship outside and ties it near the mouth of the harbor. The other captains bring their vessels inside. That small decision is the only reason anyone escapes what happens next. The bag of winds and the Lystrigonian disaster sit close together in the story, and together they change the scale of everything that follows. Odysseus began with 12 ships. That matters visually. At the start of the voyage, he is not a lone wanderer. He is the commander of a small moving community. Every ship contains men who survived Troy. Every vessel carries its own group, equipment, and memories of home. Loss, therefore, happens in stages. The Cicones reduce the crews. The Cyclops kills members of the group Odysseus personally brings into the cave, but the fleet still exists. Aeolus almost sends that entire fleet back to Ithaca. Then the winds are released, and the opportunity collapses. Soon afterward, the Lystrigonians destroy the ships inside their harbor until only the vessel Odysseus kept outside can escape. From that moment, the image of the voyage becomes narrower. One ship, one mast, one remaining group. The physical reduction mirrors the emotional one. There are fewer options. A damaged ship cannot be abandoned for another vessel. A disagreement inside the crew affects everyone. When men die to Scylla, there is no second deck full of replacements. And when Zeus finally destroys the last ship after the cattle of Helios are killed, the structure reaches its final form. One man. That progression is one reason the journey feels increasingly isolated, even before Odysseus reaches Calypso. The story keeps removing layers of protection until nothing remains between the hero and the sea.
Odysseus sends men inland to investigate. They meet a young woman collecting water and ask who rules the country. She directs them toward her father's house. What they find there is not an ordinary family. The woman of the house is enormous. Her husband, Antiphates, is king of the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. One of Odysseus's scouts is seized and killed. The others run back toward the harbor. The alarm spreads through the city. Lastrygonians gather along the cliffs above the Greek ships and begin throwing rocks down into the trapped harbor. The narrow entrance that made the water look so safe now becomes a death sentence. Ships collide. Hulls break. Men trying to escape are attacked from above. Odysseus's vessel is the only one positioned outside the trap. He cuts the mooring rope and orders his men to row. They escape into open water. Behind them, the rest of the fleet is destroyed. 12 ships had sailed from Troy with Odysseus. Now there is one. This is one of the most important changes in the scale of the story. Until this point, Odysseus is the commander of a fleet. After the Lastrygonians, he is the captain of a single damaged community. There will be no more separate crews to absorb losses. Every death from this point forward makes the group smaller in a way everyone can see. The surviving ship continues until it reaches the island of Aiaia. There, smoke rises from a house hidden in the forest. The men have just escaped giants who eat human beings. What waits in the next house appears far more civilized. That does not make it safer. Odysseus divides the survivors into 2 groups. One remains near the ship. The other, led by Eurylochus, goes inland to investigate the smoke. The men find a house built among the trees. Around it are wolves and lions behaving in an unnatural way. Instead of attacking, the animals approach like tame creatures. Inside, a woman is singing while she works at a loom. She is Circe. Homer calls her a goddess skilled in magic. Circe invites the visitors inside and gives them food and drink. Eurylochus alone stays back because he suspects a trap. He is right. The meal is drugged. After the men eat, Circe touches them with her wand and changes them into pigs, although their minds remain human. Eurylochus runs back to the ship and tells Odysseus what happened. He begs him not to go after them. Odysseus goes anyway. On the path to Circe's house, he meets Hermes in disguise. The god explains how to resist her spell and gives him a protective herb called moly in the poem. Odysseus enters the house. Circe prepares the same mixture for him. He drinks. She touches him with the wand. Nothing happens. When the magic fails, Odysseus draws his sword and rushes toward her. Circe immediately realizes that this must be the man Hermes had warned would eventually come to her island. But Odysseus still does not trust her. Before accepting her hospitality, he makes her swear that she is not planning another attack against him. Only after the oath does he allow the encounter to change. Circe restores the transformed men. She feeds the survivors, houses them, and becomes an ally rather than an enemy. And something unexpected happens. Odysseus stays, not for a night, not for a week, for a year. The crew eats, drinks, and recovers. The island that first looked like another lethal trap becomes a place of comfort. Eventually, the men remind Odysseus why they are there. Ithaca still exists.
Their families are still waiting, if they are waiting at all.
Odysseus asks Circe to keep the promise she made to help him return home. Her answer is not what he expects. Before the ship can sail toward Ithaca, Odysseus must travel in the opposite direction from ordinary life. He must visit the realm of the dead, There he must find the shade of Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, and ask how the journey can be completed. For the men, the news is devastating. They have survived giants, storms, and magic only to learn that the route home now leads through Hades. The departure is darkened by another death before the ship even leaves the island. A young member of the crew named Elpenor had fallen asleep on the roof of Circe's house. Startled awake, he forgets where he is, falls from the roof and dies. The others do not realize what has happened before they sail. Odysseus will see him again very soon, but not alive. Circe's island is one of the places where the Odyssey becomes difficult to reduce to a simple category. She is dangerous. She is helpful. She transforms men into animals. She later restores them. She keeps Odysseus with her for a year. She also becomes the guide who tells him how to survive the underworld, the sirens, Scylla, and the other dangers ahead. That change is part of what makes her memorable. The first image of Circe is domestic rather than monstrous. She is inside her house, working and singing. Animals move around her. The men who enter are given food and drink. The threat arrives through hospitality that has been altered into a trap. The transformation of the crew is also more disturbing than a simple change of shape. Their minds remain aware. The men understand that they have been reduced to animals. Odysseus survives because Hermes gives him help before he enters. The mysterious plant called moly protects him from Circe's potion. Homer describes it as difficult for mortals to obtain, while a god can provide it. This is another pattern in the Odyssey. Odysseus is extraordinarily capable, but he is not surviving by human intelligence alone. At several critical moments, divine assistance gives him the possibility of using that intelligence. The hero still has to act. Hermes does not simply defeat Circe for him. Odysseus has to drink, resist, threaten her, and secure an oath. Then, the episode slows down. The men are restored. They eat. They recover. The danger becomes comfort. And they stay. For a year. That long pause can seem strange in a story about a man desperate to reach home, but the Odyssey is full of these distortions of time. 10 years disappear at Troy before the voyage begins. A year passes with Circe. Years pass with Calypso. At other moments, the men are only days from Ithaca before losing all their progress. The journey, therefore, does not feel like a straight line measured in distance. It is a series of expansions and collapses. A few miles from home can become another year away. A beautiful island can become a prison. A dangerous goddess can become an ally. The chapter also contains one of the least heroic deaths in the entire story. Elpenor survives the Lastrygonians. He survives Circe's transformation. Then, after drinking heavily, he sleeps on the roof. When he wakes suddenly, he forgets where he is, falls, and dies. The crew leaves without realizing what has happened. Odysseus will meet him again among the dead. This detail is useful because it prevents the voyage from becoming a world where only spectacular dangers matter. A cyclops can kill you. So can a bad fall. And when Circe finally sends Odysseus onward, the next destination is not another island of the living. It is a place where the consequences of all these losses can speak back.
Circe gives Odysseus instructions for reaching the place where the living can speak with the dead. The ship sails toward the boundaries of the known world. The imagery becomes darker. They reach the land of the Cimmerians, described as a place without the ordinary light of the sun. Odysseus follows Circe's directions. He digs a trench and pours offerings for the dead. He sacrifices animals and guards the blood until Tiresias appears, because the shades that drink are able to speak with him. Before the prophet arrives, another figure comes forward, Elpenor. Odysseus is shocked to see a member of his own crew among the dead when he did not know the man had died.
Elpenor explains what happened and makes a simple request. When Odysseus returns to Circe's island, he wants his body burned and buried properly. He asks that his oar be planted over the grave so that future travelers will know who lies there. It is a small moment beside the grand monsters of the Odyssey, but it says something important about the world of the poem. Homecoming matters, but so do burial, memory, and being acknowledged by the living. Odysseus promises to do it. Then Tiresias finally approaches. Iresius drinks from the offering and tells Odysseus what stands between him and home. Poseidon is still angry because of Polyphemus. The journey will remain difficult, but there is one danger the crew can still avoid. If they reach the island of Thrinacia, they must not harm the cattle belonging to Helios, the sun god. If the animals are left untouched, Tiresias says there is still a path home. If the crew kills them, destruction waits for the ship and the men aboard it. Odysseus may survive, but he will return alone, late, on another vessel, and find his own household in disorder. The warning connects the distant voyage directly to the crisis in Ithaca. Even if Odysseus survives the sea, return will not mean the end of danger. Tiresias also describes something that lies beyond the main action of the poem. After restoring order at home, Odysseus will one day have to travel inland, carrying an oar. He must continue until he reaches people so unfamiliar with the sea that they mistake it for a tool used to separate grain. There he is to make sacrifice to Poseidon. In other words, the conflict with the sea god cannot simply be outrun. It will eventually require reconciliation. When Tiresias withdraws, Odysseus remains among the dead. He sees his mother, Anticleia. When he left Ithaca for Troy, she had been alive. Odysseus did not know she had died. At first, he must keep even her away from the blood until Tiresias has spoken. Afterward, she is allowed to drink and recognize him. Their conversation gives Odysseus news of the home he has been trying to reach. Penelope still waits. Telemachus is growing into adulthood. His father, Laertes, has withdrawn from palace life and lives in grief. Anticleia explains that she herself did not die in battle or from disease. Longing for her absent son wore her away. Odysseus tries 3 times to embrace her. 3 times, his arms pass through a shadow. It is one of the quietest reminders in the Odyssey that returning late has a cost that cannot always be repaired. Odysseus may reach Ithaca, but time has continued without him. He goes on to meet the spirits of famous men connected to the Trojan War. Agamemnon tells him about his own disastrous homecoming. The commander of the Greek expedition survived Troy only to be murdered after reaching his kingdom. His story creates a dark mirror for Odysseus. It proves that reaching the shore is not the same as being safe at home. Achilles appears as well. Odysseus praises the honor he has among the dead, but Achilles rejects the idea that glory makes death desirable. He would rather be alive in poverty than rule over the dead. For an epic culture obsessed with fame and heroic memory, the answer is striking. The greatest warrior at Troy does not tell Odysseus to seek a glorious death.
He tells him, in effect, that life matters more. Odysseus also encounters Ajax, who still refuses to forgive him for the dispute over the armor of Achilles. Even death has not erased every grievance borne during the war. The longer Odysseus remains, the more the underworld changes from a place of prophecy into a landscape of memory. He sees legendary figures and punishments. He sees what remains after heroic ambition has ended. Eventually, fear overtakes curiosity. Odysseus returns to the ship. The living men row away from the land of the dead and sail back to Circe. There, they first keep the promise made to Elpenor. His body is burned and buried, and his oar is placed above the grave. Then Circe gives Odysseus the final instructions he will need for the most dangerous stretch of water still ahead. First come the Sirens, then Scylla and Charybdis. And beyond them lies the island Tiresias warned them never to touch. The underworld section changes the emotional scale of the Odyssey. Until this point, most of the journey has been about the next danger. Escape the Cyclops, control the winds, survive the giants, rescue the crew from Circe, reach the next shore. Among the dead, the story becomes less concerned with the next few days and more concerned with what all heroic journeys eventually become. Memory. Odysseus meets people whose stories continued without him. His mother Anticlea died while he was away. She can tell him about Ithaca, Penelope, Telemachus, and Laertes, but Odysseus cannot bring her back into the living world. When he tries to embrace her, there is nothing solid for his arms to hold. That moment gives the phrase, "return home," a harder meaning. The home Odysseus wants is not frozen in the year he left it. People age, children become adults, parents die, relationships survive or collapse. The longer the voyage lasts, the less possible it becomes to return to exactly what existed before Troy. Agamemnon offers another warning. He reached home, and he was murdered there. For Odysseus, that story matters because it destroys the assumption that the palace itself is the finish line. A successful sea voyage does not guarantee a successful homecoming. The danger can be waiting inside the house. Achilles creates a different contrast. At Troy, Achilles represented the greatest form of warrior fame. His name survives because of what he did in battle. In the world of the dead, glory looks different. The heroic reputation that mattered so much among the living cannot restore ordinary life. That encounter quietly changes the meaning of success. The Odyssey does not erase fame. Odysseus is still proud of his reputation. The poem itself preserves it. But the dead show its limits. Ajax shows another limit. Odysseus tries to speak with him, but Ajax remains angry over the dispute that followed Achilles' death. The old rivalry has survived death itself. Even among shades, the consequences of human choices remain. The underworld therefore gives Odysseus three kinds of information. Tiresias gives him knowledge of what will happen. His mother gives him knowledge of what has happened at home. The heroes of Troy give him knowledge of what heroic success looks like after death. And then he leaves. The most important thing about the journey to the dead may be that Odysseus does not belong there yet. He has information. He has warnings. He still has work to do among the living. When he returns to Circe's island, he finally gives Elpenor the burial that was forgotten. Only then does the voyage continue. The next dangers are some of the most famous in the entire poem. But after the underworld, they feel different. Odysseus now knows the shape of the disaster ahead. Knowing does not mean he can prevent all of it.
Circe tells Odysseus that the sirens do not attack ships with claws or weapons. They use knowledge. Their voices are so compelling that sailors who hear them lose control of themselves. The shore around them is described as a place of death. Anyone who steers close enough to listen does not continue home. Circe gives the crew a way past. The sailors must soften wax and press it into their ears so they cannot hear the song. Odysseus, however, is allowed to listen under one condition. He must be tied to the mast. And if he begs to be released, the crew must tighten the ropes rather than obey him. It is a perfect solution for a hero whose curiosity repeatedly creates danger. Odysseus does not have to become less curious. He has to create a situation in which his future self cannot act on that curiosity. As the ship approaches the island, the wind falls away. The sea becomes unnaturally calm. The men put wax in their ears and row. Odysseus stands bound upright against the mast. Then, the singing begins. The sirens call him by name. They know who he is. They promise not simply pleasure, but understanding. They claim knowledge of what happened at Troy and knowledge of the wider world. The temptation is aimed precisely at the part of Odysseus that wants to see, hear, and understand everything. He signals desperately for the sailors to free him. They cannot hear the song. They only see their captain, trying to escape his bonds. So they row harder and tie him more tightly. The voices fade behind them. Once the island is safely out of hearing, the wax is removed and Odysseus is released. No one has died,
It is one of the rare dangers in the middle of the Odyssey that the crew passes exactly as instructed. There is almost no time to celebrate. Ahead, the sea begins to roar. Chapter 13, Scylla and Charybdis. The next passage is not a puzzle with a perfect answer. On one side is Charybdis. At intervals, the sea itself seems to disappear into a violent whirlpool before being thrown back upward. A ship caught too close could be destroyed completely. On the other side is Scylla. She waits high in the rock with multiple long necks and heads capable of reaching down to the passing ship. Circe has already told Odysseus the terrible logic of the choice. Do not try to fight Scylla. Sail past quickly. Better to lose a small number of men than risk the entire ship against Charybdis. Odysseus does not tell the crew everything. He gives them orders for navigating the water, but hides the certainty that Scylla will take some of them. If the sailors know what is waiting above, he fears they will stop rowing and hide below deck at the moment the ship most needs speed. He also disobeys part of Circe's advice. He puts on armor and takes weapons, hoping that he may be able to defend the men after all.
The sirens are passed, not fought. Scylla takes her victims before Odysseus can meaningfully respond. Charybdis has to be avoided. That makes intelligence broader than clever tricks. Sometimes intelligence means understanding that the battle should not happen. Sometimes it means accepting a smaller loss. Sometimes it means obeying information you do not like. The passage between Scylla and Charybdis is the clearest example because Odysseus is effectively told that there is no perfect route. If he moves too close to Charybdis, everyone may die. If he moves near Scylla, some men will die. A leader who has spent much of the poem finding unexpected escapes now has to choose a path that includes sacrifice. This is also why the episode works so well visually. The ship is not attacking a monster from a safe distance. It is moving through a narrow space where every direction contains danger. The sea itself has become a trap. Chapter 14, The Cattle of the Sun. By this stage, the men are exhausted. They have rowed past the sirens. They have watched Scylla tear companions from the ship. Night is approaching. Eurylochus argues that forcing everyone back into open water in darkness is itself dangerous. Odysseus gives in on one condition. No one is to touch the sacred cattle or sheep of Helios. The men swear an oath. For a while, they keep it. Then, the weather traps them. A powerful wind prevents the ship from leaving. Days become weeks. The food Circe provided runs out. The men try fishing and catching birds, but hunger deepens. Odysseus leaves the others to pray for help. While he is away, exhaustion overcomes him and he falls asleep. Eurylochus speaks to the crew. His argument is desperate but understandable. Every form of death is terrible, he says, but starving slowly is the worst. Better to kill the best cattle, sacrifice them to the gods, eat, and promise Helios a magnificent temple if they ever reach Ithaca. The men agree. They kill the cattle. The act crosses the line Tiresias and Circe had made completely clear. When Helios learns what happened, he demands justice from Zeus and the other gods. If the crew is not punished, he threatens to take his light away from the living world and shine among the dead instead. The sailors remain on the island for several days, eating what they have killed. Then, the wind changes. They launch the ship. Not far from land, the sky darkens. Zeus sends a storm and strikes the vessel with lightning. The mast breaks. The ship is shattered. The crew is thrown into the sea. Every remaining companion of Odysseus dies. The man who left Troy as commander of 12 ships is now alone. He ties parts of the wreck together and drifts. The current carries him back toward the waters of Scylla and Charybdis. When Charybdis begins pulling the wreck downward, Odysseus escapes by clinging to a fig tree growing above the whirlpool. He hangs there until pieces of the vessel are thrown back up, drops onto them, and paddles away with his hands. For 9 days he is carried across the sea. On the 10th, he reaches Ogygia, the island of Calypso. This is where the adventure story catches up with the place Homer showed us near the beginning. The most famous monsters are behind him. The ships are gone. The crew is dead. And the last great obstacle is not a creature waiting to eat him. It is time.
By the time the cattle of Helios are killed, it is easy to see Odysseus's crew as the people who repeatedly destroy their own chance of survival. Sometimes that is fair. They refuse to leave Ismarus quickly. They open Aeolus's bag. They insist on landing on Thrinacia. They kill animals they have been explicitly warned not to touch. But the Odyssey becomes more interesting if the crew are treated as exhausted human beings rather than as a machine designed to make bad decisions. These men have been away from home for years. They survived the Trojan War. They have watched friends die. They have been blown away from Ithaca when the island was already visible. Most of their fleet was crushed in a harbor by cannibal giants. Some were transformed by Circe. They have sailed to the region of the dead. They have rowed past creatures that can take men directly from the deck. They are hungry. They are frightened. And they are expected to continue trusting the same commander who led them into the Cyclops' cave and refused to leave quietly after escaping it. That does not make every decision wise. It explains why obedience becomes harder. Eurylochos is especially important here. He is often the man who questions Odysseus. At Circe's house, his suspicion keeps him from being transformed. Later, his resistance can look cowardly or disloyal. On Thrinacia, he becomes the voice that persuades the starving crew to kill the cattle. The conflict between Odysseus and his men, therefore, is not simply intelligence against stupidity. It is leadership, under extreme pressure. Odysseus possesses information the crew does not always have. He also sometimes withholds information. He can make brilliant plans. He can also make decisions driven by pride. The crew can disobey and create catastrophe. They can also correctly recognize danger that Odysseus wants to approach. The voyage slowly destroys trust on both sides. That is one reason the final loss feels inevitable, even though Tiresias and Circe have clearly explained how to avoid it. The gods provide a rule. Do not harm the cattle. The environment creates pressure. The wind traps them. Food disappears. Hunger grows. Then, human beings make the choice. This combination appears throughout the Odyssey. Fate defines the boundaries. The gods influence the conditions. Human decisions determine how the characters move inside them. When Zeus destroys the last ship, the voyage changes permanently. There is no longer a crew to command. No argument. No mutiny. No one left to blame. For the first time since Troy, Odysseus is completely alone. Odysseus remains on Calypso's island for years. This is easy to compress into a sentence when retelling the Odyssey, but the length matters. The Great Voyage is not 10 years of constant monster attacks. Much of it is delay. War consumed a decade of Odysseus's life. Wandering consumes another. Calypso's island becomes the final and longest pause. Homer does not present Odysseus as a man delighted to have escaped responsibility. By the time we see him on Ogygia, he spends his days looking across the water and grieving for Ithaca. Calypso can offer beauty, comfort, and a kind of existence beyond normal mortality, but she cannot turn another island into his home. That is why the intervention of the gods at the beginning of the poem matters so much. Athena raises his case on Olympus. Zeus agrees that he should be allowed to leave. Hermes carries the message to Calypso. She is not pleased. She points out the double standard by which male gods freely take mortal lovers while goddesses are criticized when they do the same. But she accepts the command. Odysseus is told to build a raft. Calypso provides tools, timber, cloth, and supplies. After years of waiting, he finally pushes out onto the sea. For more than 2 weeks, the voyage goes well. Then, Poseidon returns and sees him.
The god raises a storm so violent that the raft begins to come apart. Odysseus is thrown into the water. A sea goddess, Ino, takes pity on him and gives him a protective veil. Athena calms the winds enough for him to survive. After days of struggle, Odysseus reaches the coast of Scheria, land of the Phaeacians. He is naked, exhausted, and covered with salt. He crawls into shelter beneath bushes and covers himself with leaves. The king who commanded armies at Troy falls asleep like a shipwrecked stranger with nothing. The next person to find him is not a warrior or god. It is a young woman, washing clothes near the river. The phrase Odysseus's 10-year journey can create the impression that he spends 10 full years sailing from island to island. The chronology is stranger than that. The Trojan War itself lasts 10 years before the Odyssey's homecoming journey begins. After Troy, some adventures happen relatively quickly. The fleet moves from one crisis to the next, but enormous blocks of time are spent in only a few places. Odysseus remains with Circe for roughly a year. After the destruction of the final ship, he eventually reaches Calypso and remains on Ogygia for about 7 years. That means most of the famous monster encounters occupy only a fraction of the total decade. This changes how the journey should feel. The Cyclops is terrifying, but it does not consume years. Waiting does. Being trapped does. Losing the ability to continue does. The longest obstacle is not Scylla or Charybdis. It is an island beautiful enough to live on, and impossible to leave without divine permission. This also helps explain why the Odysseus who finally reaches Ithaca should not look like the same man who sailed away from Troy. He has spent around 20 years away from home, when the war and return are combined. Telemachus has gone from infancy to adulthood. Penelope has spent a generation managing uncertainty. Laertes has grown old. The passage of time is therefore one of the Odyssey's invisible monsters. It cannot be stabbed. It cannot be tricked. And even when Odysseus finally wins the journey, none of it can be recovered.